All right, ready to up your trading game. Today, we're diving into supply and demand zones. We're talking serious intel here, excerpts from a Supply and Demand Dashboard Pro user manual, and a deep dive into the supply and demand strategy itself.
Forget basic trend lines. We're going deeper, understanding the core mechanics of the market.
Love it. Both sources agree. This isn't just some random strategy, it's about understanding how prices really move. But why should our listener care? The supply and demand strategy calls it a market theory, not just a tactic. What's the difference?
You nailed it. It's all about the big players, the institutions with the deep pockets. They don't just buy like you or I. Imagine a hedge fund wants, say, 10 million shares.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do that all at once. The price would go haywire.
Right, everyone would jump in, driving the price even higher.
Exactly. So they break up those massive orders, spread them out, and as they do, they leave pending orders, basically saying, we're still buying if it dips back down.
Yeah.
These hidden footprints, these pending orders, that's what forms our supply and demand zones.
So they create these zones, and then the market just naturally gravitates toward them because they know there's a chance those big players will step in again.
Precisely. The supply and demand strategy uses a great analogy, an auction. Everyone wants that rare item. The price goes crazy, then some people cash out, price dips. But those initial swings, that's your supply and demand zone forming. And get this, our user manual calls them areas of major imbalances.
Ooh, I love the dramatic flair. The greater the imbalance, the greater the move in price. And that's what we want, right? Those big wins.
That's where this software comes in. It doesn't just show the zones, it analyzes their strength. Imagine, you see a zone, great, but wouldn't you want to know how much buying or selling really went into it? That's the strength rating the manual talks about.
So not just eyeballing it, but getting hard data on which zones are the real deal.
Absolutely. And it gets better. The supply and demand strategy mentions looking at multiple time frames, right?
Yeah, like zooming in and out on a map, getting the big picture and the street view all at once.
Exactly. You've got your daily chart showing the overall trend, then zoom into, say, the 30-minute, and look for zones matching that bigger picture.
Daily tells me if I should buy or sell, then the 30-minute helps me find the perfect entry, using the zones as my guide.
Bingo! And here's where Dashboard Pro gets really interesting. It highlights these nested zones, zones lining up across multiple time frames. Imagine a juicy demand zone on your 30-minute, and bam, it lines up perfectly with one on your daily chart. Confirmation.
Okay, chills. We're talking about pinpointing when the market is most likely to reverse or break out, all with supply and demand.
You're catching on quick. But we've only scratched the surface. This Dashboard Pro has even more to offer.
Do tell. Our listeners need those insider secrets, those aha moments. What else does this software have up its sleeve?
Well, for starters, it's selective. It doesn't show you every single supply and demand zone. It picks out the best ones, the highest probability setups, like having a pro trader looking over your shoulder pointing out the good stuff.
Okay, now I'm really interested. How does it do that?
Filters. Remember, areas of major imbalances. You can filter those zones by specific things that tell you how strong they are.
So instead of just guessing, I can use these filters to find the zones with the most potential. Tell me more about these filters.
Absolutely. It looks at things like how many candles form the zone, more candles, more traders involved, bigger potential impact. It also looks at price travel, basically, how far the price moved away from the zone after it formed. A strong rejection, a sharp move away, means it's more likely to hold strong later on.
So if a stop tries to break through a certain price but gets pushed back hard, that level becomes even more important in the future, like a wall that's been tested and didn't budge.
Exactly. And then there's zone size. Wider zone usually means a bigger imbalance between buyers and sellers, which could lead to bigger price moves. So combine these filters and boom, you're focused on the zones with the most potential.
That's incredibly powerful, like having a whole trading team helping me out. But before we get too excited about the software, let's go back to basics for a sec. You mentioned something earlier about engulfing bars. What are those, and why should I care?
Great question. Remember we talked about those little clues, those confirmation signals? Engulfing bars are one of those. Candlestick patterns that pop up at the start of a supply or demand zone and can tell you something big's about to happen.
Like a signal flare saying, hey, pay attention here.
Exactly. Basically, one candle completely engulfs the one before it, like a wave crashing over a smaller wave, a potential shift in momentum. See that near a strong zone? Could be a very good trading opportunity.
So engulfing bars, early warning signs. But to really use these zones, we need to tell the difference between quick dips and actual trend changes, right? Pullbacks versus reversals.
You got it. Even pros get tripped up here. A pullback just a temporary dip or spike. Think of it like a breather during a hike. A reversal, that means a complete change in direction. Turning around, heading back down the mountain. Both can be opportunities, but you got to know which one you're looking at.
Okay, so if I see a potential buy near a demand zone, how do I use this whole supply and demand thing to tell if it's a pullback or a reversal?
Now we're getting to the good stuff. The supply and demand strategy links this directly to breakouts and fakeouts, which, by the way, the Dashboard Pro is awesome at showing visually. Right on. The supply and demand strategy says to pay close attention to those breakouts. Let's say we're in an uptrend, pull back to a demand zone. Got to figure out what's next. If the price bounces off that zone, then breaks above recent resistance. Think breaking through a ceiling, that's a breakout. Good sign we're still in that uptrend, just a quick breather.
So it's like price catches its breath, then keeps going up.
Exactly. But if it breaks down through that demand zone, like really plows through it like it's crashing through the floor, that might be a reversal coming, not just a breather anymore. We're switching directions.
So how strong that move is, and whether it breaks through those support and resistance levels, that's the clue. This is where those nested zones come in, right? If we see it happening on different time frames at the same time, that's got to mean something.
There you go. Breakout on a lower time frame lines up with a break on a higher time frame. That's your confirmation, like a signal flare going off.
This is making so much sense now. We're finding those spots where the institutions are making moves, then using time frames, breakouts, even those candlestick patterns like engulfing bars to find the best entries and exits. We're learning the market's language.
You got it. And that Dashboard Pro, that's a powerful tool to help you see it all clearly.
It really seems like it. But for those who aren't using that software yet, what are the big takeaways? How can they apply this with their own charts?
One of the biggest takeaways from the supply and demand strategy. Don't just trade zones blindly. You got to see the whole picture. What's the trend? Uptrend, downtrend? Are we just stuck in a range? Look at the higher time frames first. Get your bearings.
Don't start climbing until you know which mountain to climb, right?
Exactly. Once you know the trend, then you look for supply and demand zones that fit that trend. Uptrend, you're looking to buy near demand zones where buyers are going to step in. Downtrend, sell near supply zones. That's where the sellers will be.
Work with the market, not against it. Makes sense. Fighting the trend is tough. Speaking of which, what about support and resistance? I know that trips people up sometimes.
It doesn't have to be that complicated. Think of a demand zone like a floor, holding the price up. That's support. Supply zone, that's your ceiling, keeping it from going higher. Resistance.
So we're not just seeing lines on a chart anymore. We're seeing the supply and demand, the forces behind those lines.
Now you're thinking like a trader. And once you start seeing it that way, those charts aren't so scary anymore.
Not at all. We've covered a ton today. The basics of supply and demand, all the way to actually finding those trades. But before we go, I want to leave everyone with something to think about.
Oh, I love a good cliffhanger. Hit me with it.
We've been talking trading, right? Charts, markets, all that. But what if this supply and demand thing, what if it's bigger than that? What if it's everywhere?
Okay, now you've got me thinking.
Right. We see in the markets, but think about concert tickets. Way more demand than supply. Prices skyrocket. Or housing, limited supply, high demand. You know those prices are going to be crazy.
Wow, it really is everywhere when you start to look for it.
It's like this underlying force that drives so many things, even beyond just buying and selling.
It's all connected.
Exactly. All right, everyone, here's your challenge. Start looking for these imbalances, these supply and demand zones in your everyday life. Could be anything. That new restaurant everyone's dying to get into, the price of vintage sneakers, even how much you charge for your skills. See if you can spot those points where everyone wants something, but there's only so much to go around. It's a whole new way of seeing in the world. And on that note, this has been an awesome deep dive. Until next time, happy trading and keep those charts tight.